Hello and welcome to the Waking Youth podcast, a show dedicated to reminding us to not sleepwalk through our waking state. Today I'm conversing with Giancarlo Canavesio, former investment banker, documentary producer, and owner of Mangusta Productions and Mango TV. Giancarlo is recognized as one of today's best producer of controversial, paradigm-challenging, and mind-expanding themes like plant medicines, consensual non-monogamy, tantric sex, and conscious capitalism. His documentaries, for example, 2012, Time for Change, and Neurons to Nirvana, all made the lists for best social change docs. More recently based in Ibiza, Giancarlo's involved in regenerative projects in the fields of hospitality with Difuso and agriculture with Terra Viva. I ran into Giancarlo's work as I found myself in a rabbit hole of Daniel Pinchbeck. That rabbit hole eventually led me to Giancarlo's show, Mango TV Podcast, now one of my top morning podcasts. In this episode, we explored Giancarlo's story of becoming that eventually led him to create a path that, in my opinion, is rather original as well as integral and always grounded in humor, lightness, and playfulness. I'm Carlota Guedes, and this is the Waking Youth Podcast. Welcome, Giancarlo, to the Waking Youth Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I would like to ground things a little bit in personal history, okay? And I listened to a lot of interviews that you hosted and that you also were a guest. You mentioned sometimes your dad and how it influenced you and your decisions later on in your life. But I think I've never heard you talk about movies in your childhood. And I just had this question. Maybe it wasn't a significant thing, but I'm just curious if, knowing how much you're into also the production, film production, if movies were a part of your childhood.
Yeah, that's a very good question because I had I don't like mental disease labels, but I had what can be labeled as a attention deficit disorder in childhood,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was really it was very hard for me to keep attention on anything. So I was not a good reader. Also, the movie I was getting distracted. And then my love affair with movies started actually later on when they invented DVD.
Mm-hmm.
That was, in my 20s or late teens. I was able to pause and rewind with the remote control. And that really helped me to, when I was getting distracted, I would pause and rewind. And then there was the bonus material, there was the comment of the director, there was the interview with the actor. And I was living in London at the time, and there was a little music store in Shaftesbury Avenue. I used to live in Covent Garden, and I discovered everybody. The French, the English, the producer Alain Sard with all the French, Romer, Chabrol, all the French actress that I really loved, and then the English filmmakers and Kieslowski and Woody Allen and Polanski and Kubrick and I remember spending hours and hours and hours. I had this little apartment in London,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah. So in childhood there was no movies, but in my late teens I catch up definitely.
Okay, late teens. Interesting. Okay. And you traveled a lot as a kid, no? Or you just lived in different places? You mentioned
So
Jakarta, Brussels,
yeah,
Athens, Rome.
my father was a diplomat.
Mm-hmm.
He was representing Italy abroad. So every 4 years he had to move. That's just the way Italian diplomacy works. It works 8 years abroad in two different capitals. So 4 years, and then 4 years back in Rome. And then again, 4, 8, 4, 8 for all their life. And So I moved around with my father until my parents split up, and then we stayed in Rome for between my, I don't know, 12 to 20, something like that.
Okay. I selected a few words that you mention a lot. 3, vulnerability. And you mentioned a lot Brene Brown, who I also appreciate dearly. Courage and humor. Perhaps you don't mention the humor a lot, but I feel there's so much humor in the way that you carry yourself and engage with life. If you had to talk about these 3 words in this context of your early life, what memories come or experiences?
So, vulnerability is a concept I discovered late also, because, as most people do, they just avoid it. Whenever they feel just the beginning of vulnerability, they switch the channel, the environment, the activity, whatever they are doing. That, whenever there's the smell of vulnerability, immediately people escape. And I was doing that all the time. I didn't like to engage in vulnerable conversation. Doing vulnerable activity for me was a lot sharing my feelings. That was, I vulnerability is something I discovered later on. I'm sure we have time to discuss all the transformative event in my life, and maybe we'll go back to that then. Courage, my father was very courageous from really a physical adventure point of view. My grandfather was an alpinist. He had a record on climbing this side of the Monte Rosa in Italy, in the Italian Alps. My father crossed crossed with a sailing boat, I don't know how many oceans, from Kuala Lumpur to the Mediterranean. He was very brave in fishing with the shark, and skiing, and I end up in an avalanche. So his type of courage was very much adrenaline linked. It was, to be honest, it was a form of escapism, really. But so I was initiated to that kind of physical courage, and then again, psychological courage is actually linked to vulnerability, right? And what was the third word?
Humor.
Humor. Yeah, humor is so important, not to take yourself seriously, and yeah, I think it's a very, very, very important antidote for human suffering. Yeah, I recommend people to explore these three themes.
Good. Okay. And just to get a sense also of this process of becoming, I was looking into your studies as well. So if you want to talk a little bit about, perhaps in the spirit of that, this connection with vulnerability, or anything else that you might feel inspired to share, but leading to the moment that in your jargon would be the cathartic moment. Before that, if you could just give a bit of the context of you studying, I have here that you studied business in Rome, then you got involved in investment banking, then financial consultancy. If you could just paint a bit of the picture, because also it's sometimes it's interesting to see what was there before leading to those moments of waking up.
Yeah. So as you say, you're very accurate. I did a degree in economy and commerce at the University of Rome. Then I went to London, and I was an investment banker for roughly 10 years. Then I started a risk management company. We would advise institutional investors like pension funds in their investment. My partners were PhD. We would use the program of Markowitz, which won a Nobel Prize on portfolio diversification technique, manager selection, hedge fund manager selection. That's what then brought me to London, to New York, was selecting hedge fund managers for those European institutional clients. And yeah, I mean, I was my modus operandi was like to be just very busy all the time. I was joking, back then I heard someone saying that when the indigenous tribes from America would start traveling to to the UN, to Geneva or to Prague. I'm not sure. They would take the plane, and then once they land, they would build a tent nearby the airport and wait for their soul for 2 days or 3 days. They thought that it take the soul 3 days to catch up with the body when you take such a radical way of traveling. And so my joke with everybody was that, I don't want to deal with my soul. So I try not to stay more than 4 days in every place. So I will travel like as much as, and it was a joke, but there was some truth to it. I really didn't like to be alone. I really didn't like any contemplative practice. And then my father was, since a little kid, he would tell me things like, every night spent alone is a wasted night. So I was like, in constant search for love, or not love actually, for lust and for sexuality and I remember when I started dating my girlfriend and then become my wife. I remember once she was telling me, "But so tell me how you feel," and I didn't even understand the question.
Yeah.
I thought, "What do you mean? What I feel? I mean, I'm not tired, I'm not hungry, I'm not cold, I'm not horny." I mean, I know it's quite embarrassing. I'm quite ashamed to say that, but I'm gonna be totally vulnerable and transparent. So yeah, that was my life. Giancarlo 1.0, like someone
Yeah.
calls me.
And let me and let me stay there for a bit, because I think so many listeners, probably they're in their 20s, and I think there's a very particular feeling in your 20s that is also of course you're always creating yourself, we're always changing as human beings, but particularly when you're 20, in your 20s, it seems like you're really defining and searching for that story that will be the story also that will continue to be the story of your life. And back then, if you can still connect, because what I find interesting and intriguing about your path is that you didn't just went the alternative way. There was this moment of transition, right? And also just checking with yourself, what is it that I want from my life? If you can connect still with what was driving you, what would you say is the vision there, when you were searching for perhaps more the success in a more conventional way, or money, or the traveling? If you can talk a little bit about that drive back then.
Yeah, I mean, I felt I wasn't a lost case back then because, everybody had this status anxiety, right? They wanted to be someone and be respected. And already back then, at the deep of my superficiality and secular Newtonian Cartesian view of the world, my thing was fun anxiety. My objective was to just celebrate and lose myself in more celebratory out of body experience, so more linked on maybe alcohol and ecstasy and sexuality, but more like the Dionysian way of Roman orgiastic way. So nothing with consciousness and expansion of consciousness, but just a feast of the senses. That was my objective. Of course, I cared if I was not invited to that party or that other party, but what really I was really care about was to have fun.
Yeah.
And I
Oh.
remember, I don't know if one day I want, I'm thinking I had a friend, a partner in crime back then. His name is Rafael Serrano, and I remember he would created all this party all around the world, and his motto was only good energy people. And I really resonate with that. There was other people that they didn't really care about good energy. They wanted to be invited in the right cocktail in London, or with society, and it was more important who's who. But for me, it was more important who's having more fun. I mean, it was still superficial. I'm not saying it was better, but I just want to share.
It reminds me a lot of the trickster archetype. There's some wisdom also in kind of that playful side of life. And it's curious to see later also in your journey how you keep always that play, but in coming from a different place, but always in that foundation of humor and play. It's very beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for letting me reconnect with that. I haven't done that in a while. It's true. It's true.
Yeah. Okay, so now going to those cathartic waking up moments, what would that be for you?
So you know, they say that in spiritual awakening, it's never, you know, the spiritual awakening is not a straight line going up, right? It's a series of steps. So, you know, you have a realization and boom, there is one step up. And then you go flat for a long time and sometimes even a tiny descent. And then boof, you have another step. So the way to enlightenment or to awakening, it's really a ladder. It's not a straight up, line up. So I have a lot of steps to describe. Definitely the first one was 2000 and is the year my brother got married. I think it was 2005. A friend of mine, Fabrizio Chiesa, gave me this book called Noah Levine, Dharma Punks, and it was about awakening through meditation.
Okay.
It was the son of this Buddhist scholar who was he was a really like a street gangster, and he was a drug addict, and he was in jail. And the father said, "Listen, just pay attention to the feeling of the air on your upper lip, just that." And just with this instruction, he started like paying attention, and you know, then he got it healed, and he you know, he did his time, and now he's also a Buddhist teacher, and that really stayed with me. How this incredible transformation just by the simple way of paying attention of the air on your upper lip. And I remember I was in South Africa for my brother's wedding, and I started doing that. And so that was the beginning of my meditation practice, which was very irregular, and you know, it was really not a serious practice. Then a couple of years later, I met my girlfriend at the time, and she organized an ayahuasca ceremony for me in Paris on a peniche, on a houseboat. And I didn't understand the power yet, but I felt this incredible heart opening, and I had this incredible amount of love for my friends. And then I experienced a little bit with synesthesia, with this idea that, you know, you can see sound and hear image. And there was one participant in the ceremony who was doing this. He was imitating the sound of birds, and they were like, I was not just hearing them; I was seeing them in. You know, it was just the beginning, but I knew there was something there that I needed to investigate. Then the next step was probably, you know, my wife and I, we started this practice of serious practice of ayahuasca for maybe 7-8 years, and I remember once she had a very difficult time. You know, I think there is two mechanisms in childhood that create mental disease, anxiety, depression, addiction. It's a loss of authenticity and interiorization of unworthiness. And both my wife and I, and if you dig deep enough, almost everybody who has a mental disease or unease struggle with this idea that at some time in the childhood they lost their authenticity to get the attachment of the parents back. And in the same at the same time they might interiorize this idea that they're not worthy, because when you are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and your parents lose interest in you because they have their own life, because they're busy, what you think is not that my parents are busy and distracted. You think they don't love me because I'm not lovable, and then you interiorize a sense of being unworthy. So my wife and I, we had our share of addiction and anxiety, and with ayahuasca, we really felt that we were gaining our authenticity back. And that affected our relationship because, we fell in love. We used to say that we fell in love because we see each other before we could see ourselves. But so during this year of ayahuasca, we were reconnecting with our authentic self, and so the dynamic of the couple was changing. So I would say, a series of cathartic moment where this realization with plant medicine that we were worthy and we were finding our authenticity. Then I went to rehab. I had an addiction. I had a cannabis addiction, which I couldn't beat with cannabis, with the plant medicine. And it was the Deepak Chopra Rehabilitation Center in Canada. There was one exercise where they put on the floor words you resonate with, and there were disempowerment, abuse, abandonment, betrayal, and I really resonate with the word disempowerment, and I really understood that that was a big part of my childhood, and so that was another step. Then my wife stopping to drink alcohol. That was also change of dynamic. And then, the biggest step, which you never know if there's going to be a bigger one, but was to stop alcohol and cannabis completely for me 8 months ago.
Okay. Wow.
And then finally moving to Ibiza and connecting with this community has been probably, who knows? I thought the previous step were the last one, so you never know. But now I think 2022 is the year where I really feel that I'm not I think I'm not being. Let's keep the word enlightened for the saint, but I feel I'm awake, or at least I'm getting pretty awake, or at least aware.
Yeah, I was, while you were talking about also that question of authenticity and attachment, that need we have for authenticity and attachment, that I also heard you talk about before in the context of Gabor Mate's work. And now connecting even to what you're saying now, one of the beautiful things also in the context of that work is, I think it's in the Gabor Mate's latest movie, where he talks about why trauma happens. And it's not only about the events themselves, but it also has to do with you not in that moment having someone you can trust to share that traumatic experience with you. And it really speaks to this need for community. And it's also interesting that you're now mentioning Ibiza and how important that support of a community is for us to flourish individually and collectively. um, Going back a bit, we'll get to Ibiza in a second. What I find interesting, looking a little bit at the timeline also of how the events unfolded in your life, is that you mentioned 2005, 2006, more or less, that you had the first ayahuasca experiences. And then I have here that you founded Mangusta Productions around 2005 after being introduced to film production.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit before, but I got really excited about documentary making during that phase of my first ayahuasca ceremony and meeting Daniel Pinchbeck. It was around 2005, yes.
Okay. And parallel to that, you have Mangusta Risk. So I find interesting that you have these things going on in parallel, and sometimes there's a book that I love. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert.
No,
No?
I'll check
Okay.
it out though.
It's a book about creativity, and it talks about how can you approach the challenge of creativity. First, it unpacks a bit what is this topic of creativity. Being creative is not only that you might be drawn to painting, it's just being creative in your life in general. And she talks a little bit about how important it is that we protect our creativity. And for different people, it might be different things. I think in your case, it could be the filmmaking and this the creativity that involves all this going out there in the world and really putting these movies and films out there. But she also talks about the financial aspect of it, because if you put a lot of pressure in your creativity, then you might be stressing what is most sacred to you. So she talks about different alternatives, and she gives her particular example of how she was very mindful to not live of her writing while she was still developing her writing. So she always found a way that she could have enough money, that she could feel safe and grounded, so that she could write, because what she wants to do in life, what is most sacred to her, is the writing. So looking at your path, and seeing this parallel and talking about this, making choices, I'm curious about like how intentional you were about protecting also that sacredness of perhaps the movies.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Also, I want to be mindful about your demographic of your listeners, right? How old are you, Carlota?
I'm 24.
Yeah. So this is a difficult time, right, for the younger generation to integrate some pro-social behavior or love to help the planet, but also with the neoliberal capitalistic system and make a living. I totally get that. My son is 20, and is also there is a contradiction between doing good and making money. I mean, it's possible. It's possible to do both, but definitely in our system, the creative art are more difficult to monetize than the more financial or business activity. So my for me, when I was in investment banking, I knew that I just wanted to make as much money as possible. I was not interested in being a manager in these banks. I just wanted to have some financial security to then do something else. I didn't know what it was. So I always had a little bit of a saving capital that allowed me to pursue this creative endeavor, especially with Mangusta production being not very commercial, like documentary on plant medicine and stuff like that. I just wanted to say, and maybe we have time. I want to briefly explain. I developed a model for body and mental wellness called the 4Ps.
Okay.
And maybe we can go into that a bit later. But there's one P, which is passion, meaning, purpose. So there is this psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl, says that the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. And it's beautiful, but it's difficult. The younger generation feel like, okay, but how do I find my gift? It's not that obvious. So what I would recommend, and following on the author that you mentioned, is that you try to have to balance. Finding your gift cannot be a full-time job, because you need also to support yourself. So I would definitely find a way to support yourself in parallel of looking for your gift. And then you'll see, people ask me, but so how do you know what's the gift? And I think you find what you're passionate about. The indicator is that you lose yourself into it. It's like you don't see, you lose sense of time. When you're engaged in an activity that you are fully embodied and it comes natural, you almost channel it from another dimension. You just feel transported, and it's difficult. I'm sure a lot of your friends listening now saying, okay, easier said than done. But that's why I agree with your author that, keep a job for money and keep on looking for your gift. And then if you're lucky enough, the job you picked for money might become your gift. It is possible to do, social philanthropy or some creative art have potential to be successful. The internet allow, look, with this podcast, you're doing what you love, and now you have, I don't know, 30, 50 episodes, but if you keep on doing it, and when you have 500, you can get sponsor, and so maybe you can make money, and if you keep up the good work, you will. Does it make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. Just on that question of the gift, And since I already mentioned the work of Elizabeth Gilbert, she brings something helpful, I believe, to the table, which is sometimes instead of focusing on the concept of passion, the step before might be, what are you curious about, which connects with what you were saying about the state of the flow. But for some people who might not have like a very specific thing of a passion, sometimes just paying attention to what you're naturally curious about sometimes helps.
Yeah. So let me. If I'd love to add something. Ibiza is one of the, I think, world capital of transformative practices, and what's happening in this island. There are people trying new thing and integrating different practices. So one practice that my friend Zoran Todorovic is creating is integrating psychotherapy and coaching into what he calls evolutionary coaching. Because if you think about it, if you do a psychotherapy and you find your blind spot, you find your demons, you find your pain bodies, like Eckhart Tolle calls them, then you do the work, you rewire your brain with a lot of effort, and you make peace with your demons, so now you're reasonably healed. But then if you don't have a passion, then you're like, you might be a healed bag of potatoes on the couch, right? And then vice versa, you can do a lot of coaching, Tony Robbins, and find my passion, and how do you can do all this protocol and questionnaire to find your passion and be very driven, visualization, law of attraction. You do all that, but if you do all that without the psychotherapy, then your demons and your blind spot and your pain bodies might distort the work you do with the coaching. So you might not be a healed bag of potatoes, but you can be a neurotic overachiever. So how do you manage? I think you should integrate the psychotherapy with the coaching. And I invite, for example, to look in Google Zoran Todorovic and see what he's doing with his program. And my wife will also integrate some sort of coaching on her Gabor Mate Compassionate Inquiry. Yeah, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, and that also perhaps indirectly or directly also connects the personal development, personal healing with the collective, taking responsibility for the collective and doing something in the material world.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now I think it was there in one of your descriptions, I think it was a brilliant description that you talking a little bit about yourself for one of your projects. You now say that this new stage in Ibiza, you're shifting from a focus on return on investment to return on karma. So if you want to talk a little bit about that and this most recent moment of waking up that you were talking about before.
Yes. So I have this I have three activity, right? I have Mango TV, the regenerative farm Terra Viva, and this regenerative hotel called Difuso. So when people ask me what do, I like to say I'm into regeneration. So regenerative farming, regenerative hospitality, and regenerative content. But so it's quite a sad state of affair. But the reality is that in these three business, there's an inverse relationship between return on investment and return on karma. Return on karma meaning positive impact. Like in the field, for example, there's a negative correlation between biodiversity and profitability. The science of permaculture explain that you need to pursue radical biodiversity, having different plants, so you don't have to use pesticide and fertilizer, so you preserve the nutrients and you feed your microbiota and you boost your immune system and you feel great. But the problem is that with radical biodiversity, having crop rotation and animal rotation, you have harvest intertwined at the same time. It's very labor intensive. You can't do You can't use big machine. You can't industrialize it, right? In order to make money, as what's happening in the world, you have industrial agriculture, which is this big hundreds and hundreds of hectares of one crop, potato, tomato, eucalyptus, so that the machine can get them and you can have, they can last in the shelves and you can maximize profit. So, my life now with these three activity, it's a tension between return on investment and return on karma. When the farmer says, okay, we need to spend this to increase the biodiversity, maybe, capture more water or planting this crop, but this crop doesn't have a big market value, but it helps because, for example, I don't know, it pushes away the ants from the tomato. Biodiversity and investment is a inverse correlation, and the hospitality business also, because if you maximize occupancy, then you take whoever pays more. But then that's not what I want to do. I want to create a ecosystem of regeneration within the different casita. So I want to host teachers and healers. And sometimes teachers and healers, because of the choice they make in their life, they don't have the money that the summer people can pay in Ibiza. So do I prefer to have a beautiful spiritual teacher? For example, the gentleman I had my incredible mystical experience here in this yurt where I'm talking to you now. Or should I keep the apartment free for the 3 months in the summer for people that come and spend, I don't know, 5,000 on a nightclub? You know what I mean? Yeah. So there's always a tension. And also for Mangusta production, if your listener wants to go to the site mango.tv, you'll see that my content is beautiful, is life-changing, but it's not very commercial. It takes people like you, intellectually curious, into this theme that don't expect content to entertain them only, but also to inspire them and touch them and teach them, But I'm optimistic about the new generation. So that's the return on karma versus return on investment. Also, there's ROF, which is return on fun, which is also very important.
Yeah, I hear you. And last night I was watching the 2012 again. It's such a beautiful movie, and it also speaks about the financial system, right? Like what you're talking about, the relation between the profitability, what you're doing with the regenerative agriculture. That perhaps we need different kinds of currencies to kind of support different kinds of, or to nudge different kinds of behaviors. But I think that's such an interesting theme, and I think it's very present, like for all of us now, but particularly if you're trying to, I speak in my case, and I talk a lot about this with my friends. That's like, okay, we're in our 20s, we already have this awareness of what's wrong, what should be changed, how might we facilitate in our own little ways, how can we be a channel for that positive change. At the same time, we're also trying to build our financial stability. And looking at stories like yours, it almost feels like you're kind of experiment with post-work utopias where you're trying to get to that financial stability, to then do things that really bring you to life and really generate life, or regenerative. Yeah, so it's what you said. I'm curious about how you also think about that on your day to day.
I was very lucky. I was in at the right moment at the right time. The 90s in the financial market were very easy.
Yeah.
They are experiment with monkeys throw darts to stocks, and they would make a lot of money. Just the monkeys through in the 90s. So unfortunately, I was lucky. So now, what you mentioned about...
No, fortunately.
No, sorry. Yeah, fortunately, I was very lucky. But unfortunately, it doesn't happen often.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe being in the crypto in the right moment, or being, but I was lucky because, I was there at the right moment and then I got out. I'm thinking that what you mentioned about alternative currency and are we going to be able in the future to connect the profitability and the bottom line of corporation and company also to they call it the triple bottom line, not just profit, but profit, people, and planet. So is it possible that young generation like you, my son, my stepdaughter Talia, who's got your age, is it possible for you guys to go into the workforce and make money, make a living, be able to buy your own house, but also doing good in the world? And that's the $1 million question. There's a lot of experiment. Some people talk about the blockchain technology being able to mine in the contract of some of this blockchain company also the pro-social behavior, where, for example, a pharmaceutical company that invent a specific product, for with the blockchain technology, with a certain type of smart contract, in their quarterly posting, they don't only post the number of sales, but also the impact and how many people they healed. So this is something for your generation to start investigating, the smart contract for pro-social behavior and having the triple bottom line. Maps, for example, is a non-profit who is now raising money to commercialize MDMA. Like psychedelic are becoming legal. MDMA and magic mushroom most likely will be legal next year. Definitely MDMA, maybe magic mushroom in 2024. And so there is a big rush of private equity and venture capitalists to invest in this compound in order to make money. And MAPS, for example, use the system of it's a hybrid between a profit and non-profit. It's a C corp. So basically, he retained the non-profit, and only a part of the MDMA profitability will be devoted for the return on investment. But you need your listener to investigate more. They can Google Maps and C corp and see what these guys are doing.
Okay, great. Yeah, I find this language, I don't know if you know Rainer Maria Rilke, of living the question, because sometimes we get obsessed about finding the answer, and that also takes away the fun and the challenge. So I think that living with that question is a good way to face or to embrace this challenge of how to make a living with purpose.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so now shifting to our final part of the interview. You already shared a lot of wisdom and practical wisdom also to our audience. So perhaps to close this chapter in a different way, if you could travel across time and send a message now to your 20-year-old Giancarlo, what would be some of your words of encouragement, guidance, advice to him?
I mean, definitely would be something around love, sex, and vulnerability. I was terrified by being vulnerable in a relationship. I didn't believe, my role model around long-lasting love was pretty bad. So I had a string of not very committal relationship, and I feel that I mean, we were young, but I felt that I think I should have. Okay, the advice to my 20 years old is that don't be afraid of opening your heart. Don't be afraid to go full in with your relationship and to give and make someone happy. Doesn't make you vulnerable. It makes you stronger. But in my 20, I had a different mind space.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. And last question. You actually mentioned this when we were talking about the waking up moments, that it's not one, there's several, and we're always in this process of inquiring. So I like to finish with this question. How do you then, Giancarlo, make sure that you're not now and in general sleepwalking your way through life?
Yeah, that's a good question. They say it's like, the self-inquiry and knowing yourself is like peeling the onion, and it's a never-ending peeling. So I use my relationship container, my marriage container as a sounding board. So every time, we feel that we let maybe the ego on the driving seat a little bit too much, a little bit too long. My wife immediately calls me off on that. And also, relationship with the children, and sometimes I might be carried away on my intellectual search for new interpretation of reality, and maybe I'm not maybe so present with the family. So how do I check that? Okay, so how much time do we have? Do we have time for the 4 Ps?
Yeah, go for it. We have time. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a new model that I'm developing, because
Okay.
there's so much talk about healing, and also there's so much abuse about healing, right? Like Jamie Wheal, who's an author that I really like. He talks about people that are doing excessive plant medicine. He calls them a bliss junkie and epiphany whores. There are people. Is right. Is right. There are people addicted to the psychedelic healing. They love the ayahuasca ceremony. They love the magic mushroom, the San Pedro, the peyote, and because you have this bliss experience, you have this epiphany, you have a peak experience, right? But then what happens is that you need to integrate this peak experience, and the psychedelic experience is not enough for mental wellness, for being centered, for being able to find your gift and give it away. You need to be together. You can't be sloppy. You can't be drinking too much or eating too much, or doing too much video games or porn or stupid movies. I mean, you need to be together, So how do you deal with trauma? Mostly, subtle trauma. The big trauma, I feel that it's still a question for the specialist. If you had like strong some
Trauma with capital T.
trauma, capital T, if you have post-traumatic stress disorder from an attempted suicide, or from almost deadly accident, or if you were really physical abuse. I mean, this is something which still you need. I still recommend the medical establishment. But the subtle trauma, the trauma that we all have of being ignored, not being taken care of, when we lose when we lose attachment from our parents, we lose authenticity, and we interiorize that we're not worthy. So that's what I call subtle trauma. So my model to heal subtle trauma and to to be mentally well, it's the 4 Ps.
Okay.
So the first P is psychedelic assisted compassionate inquiry. So the compassionate inquiry is a methodology invented by Gabor Mate, which is a combination of verbal therapy and somatic therapy. So with words, Gabor is an academia now. He's got a 2-year course. So the Gabor trained psychotherapists, they investigate with words the traumatic event in your childhood, and then they help you somatize them. Where in the body do you feel it? At the end of your stomach, on your back, on your neck. And with this, it's a practice. It's a 3 months period. And what we've seen, and that's so far is still underground, because some of the psychedelic are not legal yet, is that if you combine psychotherapy with a psychedelic experience, it's a practice easier to do. The psychotherapists have easier access to the subconscious material. And what happens in the brain when you have this subtle trauma is like tear. It's like you have like a tendon tear, right? If Achilles tendon, for example, there's a cartilage that creates around it. So in order to release the cartilage, you have to massage this cartilage for 6 months, the special machine, right? And so when you have this psychological injury from the loss of authenticity and interiorization of unworthiness, it's like you have a tear on your neurological fabric. And so you need to massage this tear, and that takes time. So what happened with the psychedelic, and you probably heard me saying that, it reduced the blood supply on the default mode network. Now, this is purely speculative, but my intuition is that the psychological tear, people cope with the tear with reinforcing the default mode network, which is the closest thing to your egoic armor. So what I'm trying to say is that when you take the tryptamine, so psilocybin, DMT, mescaline, LSD, you temporarily reduce the blood supply in the default mode system, and so it's like the tear goes away magically. It's like for a few hours, you know who you are, you get your authenticity back, and you get your self-worth back. And in some of this experience, maybe for the first time, you feel whole and authentic. It's quite magical. That's why this plant medicine is so popular now and fashionable, because you really feel whole and authentic again. But the problem is that it doesn't last because of the track in the skis. When the effect is over, it's so easy to go back to the familiar tracks. But in integrating the psychotherapy, specifically the compassion inquiry therapy, with this practice, you can experience how it feels to be authentic and whole. So even if you don't feel that anymore, you have the memory, and that gives you the incentive to do the therapy and find your trauma and release your trauma. And so that's the first P. Of course, it's very important, but it's not enough. I've seen it in my life. I've done ayahuasca for 8 years, but then, you need to integrate this moment. So the second P is practice of embodiment and presence, which are in fact practice of integration. So the practice of embodiment, it's of course the sport and the yoga, but also the meditation. Meditation is the practice of embodiment. The ecstatic dance, the breathing, all the practice that bring you here and now, that gets you out of your mind. There's an injury in your mind. It's like if you keep on remunerating about things in the past and the future, it's like you scratch that injury. It's like instead of massaging the cartilage, you keep on banging to it. So getting, second P, practice of embodiment and presence. And then, so let's assume you do your psychedelic, you find the right therapist that works well with this altered state of consciousness. You do your practice, but then now you still need the third P, which is passion. And then become meaning and purpose, but just finding your passion, finding your gift. We discussed that. And then that's the fourth one, which many people realize the importance. It's people in community. We are social animal. When people say, don't worry what people think, it's very hard. We do worry what people think. Not the people that we don't care, we don't respect, but we care what, our peers that we select, that we trust and we respect. We all have, 20, 30, 50, 100 people around us that we respect. And of course, we not only we care about their opinion, but we want their opinion. We want to be mirrored by them. And so, this idea of being accepted by the community, I have a role in the community, it's very important. And Ibiza is particularly good for that because, there is all this moment of being together. We babysit each other children. There is all this practice of embodiment and presence that happen in people's houses all the time. And also maybe we are, of course, privileged. I realize that, people that need to work 50, 60, 80 hours a week maybe don't have all this time for this practice. But so I don't remember why I started the four Ps on which question.
It's how do you make sure you don't sleepwalk your way through life, and you have the methodology to help you with that.
Exactly.
Okay. Beautiful. And thank you so much, Giancarlo, for this moment together.
Thank you, Carlota. Thank you. Congratulations for doing that.
Yes. Congratulations, you too.
Okay, un beso. Ciao, ciao.
Former investment banker, documentary producer, and the owner of Mangusta Productions and Mangu TV, Giancarlo Canavesio is recognized as one of today's best producer of controversial, paradigm-challenging, and mind-bending, expanding themes. Waking Youth is an independent podcast and newsletter that you can find more about at wakingyouth.substack.com. Our lovely theme music is composed and produced by Carlos Sierra, who also edits our episodes. I'm Carlota Guedes, and before you go, thank you for listening. Ciao!